Welcome to QX Church. This is Pastor Scott Conway, and today I'm talking about judging people and some of the problems with passing judgment, some of the solutions to passing judgment. It's been an interesting week or so that in three completely separate contexts I've run into really intense judgment. Now, it's no surprise that one of those contexts is political. We seem to be having a magnitude of judgmentalism in the area of politics, which seems, at least to me, that it's worse than it's ever been, where people really don't need to know anything. They can pass judgment on limited information, and then they expect agreement based upon the conclusions that they're sharing, regardless of whether or not the underlying facts that they're claiming are actually true. Like, for instance, suppose there is something that happens that affects everybody, and it fairly equally affects everybody, but someone picks a particular group that it affects, and they gripe that it affects this group. So say if it negatively affects everybody, and someone says, oh, see how this is negatively affecting women, this is a war on women. Or see how this is negatively affecting minorities, this is a war on minorities, even if it has the exact same impact on everybody. Or if something has a positive effect, say everyone's going to get a tax break, and everyone's going to get a 10% tax break. Instead of saying, it's like, oh, everyone's getting a 10% tax break, it's, we're giving all these billionaires all of these hundreds of millions of dollars. And that they will draw a limited conclusion based upon a limited interpretation of limited facts, and just expect everybody has to agree with them, or you're wrong, you're stupid, you're evil, you're something. So it should be no surprise that we're seeing this in politics. That we've had some measure of this going on for at least as long as I'm aware of, and social media seems to have greatly amplified this. So it should be no surprise that one of the areas I've seen this in is in that one. Another area that I ran into it recently is when I got judged based upon some advice that I gave. In some of my programs, of course, the very nature of programs is they have to be generic. The nature of books is they have to be generic. They're aimed at a broader audience. They don't take into account individual people's individual problems, individual diagnoses, individual physical limitations. And it'd be kind of like if I'm describing a martial arts technique and how to make a proper fist, and someone says, this guy's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because what if someone doesn't have all of their fingers? What if someone has carpal tunnel? What if someone has a broken hand? They can't make a fist like that. This guy's an idiot. And that's essentially what I was facing. That someone had determined that because someone else had a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, and that their traumatic brain injury means that one of the pieces of the advice in one of my academic programs would not be safe for that person, that clearly I was no expert, clearly I didn't know what I was talking about, because if I did, my advice would have taken into account this person's traumatic brain injury in the generic program level advice I was giving. Now imagine trying to take an audience of even 10 people for that matter, I mean forget having an audience of hundreds or thousands, and that the advice you give has to perfectly match up with everybody's idiosyncratic needs. That if your advice is, well, you should get outside and go for a walk. Oh yeah, well what about people that are in wheelchairs? What about people who have a fractured ankle? You're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. They're like, don't people with fractured ankles already know that maybe they shouldn't be out walking on it? Can't they make that one step of common sense? And I think most people can. And in this particular case, this person, rather than make that one step of common sense that says, if you have a traumatic brain injury and this is not safe for you individually because of your specific thing, then don't do that thing. All the rest of it still works for you. Do the part that works for you. Don't do the part that's dangerous for you. And for, I'd say 9 out of 10 people, maybe 99 out of 100 people, that one simple common sense step is fairly easy for people to make. However, in this particular case, rather than make that one step, they wanted to dismiss the whole thing, and that obviously the opposite of everything must therefore be the wise thing, which is doing an enormous amount of damage to the person who now suddenly didn't know what to do. And so when you get that kind of judgment and those kind of attacks, someone clearly isn't thinking past their judgment, that they had an emotional reaction. And I had to lay all of this stuff out. In fact, a lot of what I laid out in that conversation is in the second half of today. And curiously enough, and I have to admit, I was both surprised and deeply appreciative of the fact that the person I was talking to, and I kind of laid it out piece by piece, all the stuff I was talking about that's going to be in the second part of today's message, and the person I was talking to passed it on to the other person. Said, well, what do you think of this? I mean, because I told the guy what you said, and then this is what he had to say back, and pleasantly surprising me, the other person read all of it because it was in writing and said, you know what? Actually, he has a point. Please forward an apology to him. Because she realized she had passed judgment on me because a specific piece of advice in a generic program didn't apply to one individual who had a specific reason it didn't apply. And we don't see that very often. But that was very, very gratifying to see. And then the third context that I saw last weekend is I was at a seminar. Now, if you don't attend seminars these days, one of the things that typically happens if you're at a 3-day seminar and is relatively inexpensive is that somewhere in the process there's a pitch for higher end programs. Now, there are some seminars that are really just what we call pitch fests. And what a pitch fest is there's a chain of speakers, and there might be, half an hour or an hour per speaker, and every single talk is a pitch for a product or a program. And I've been to those where sometimes there might be an overarching seminar. I was at one of these in Las Vegas, and it was a 2-day event. And there were 3 seminars that were content. And then over the course of the other 16 hours, or the rest of the 16 hours, there were over a dozen pitches where every speaker who got up would give a little bit of content and then make a pitch. A little bit of content, make a pitch. A little bit of content, make a pitch. Speaker after speaker after speaker. Some of the programs they were pitching were $300. Some of the programs were $500. Some of the programs were $2,000. Some were $5,000. Some were $10,000. I didn't see a pitch for anything more than $25,000, but when you consider that there were a dozen of these pitches, I mean, no one can take all of them, and these people have crafted their presentation in order to make these pitches. So for those of us who attend these kind of events, we're not the least bit surprised when there's a pitch. And what we do is we extract the content from what's usually the first half. Sometimes we extract the content from what's in between pieces of the pitch. And we extract whatever content shows up after the pitch. Well, for this particular weekend, the pitch came at the end of day 2. And a lot of people had a reaction against it. Now, a whole bunch of us were at this seminar relatively inexpensively. It was a 3-day seminar. A bunch of people got to attend for free. A bunch of people attended for $47. A bunch of people attended for $97. So as far as seminars went, it was really, really cheap. The weekend before that, there was a seminar that was scheduled for 4 hours for $100. And the whole 4 hours was pretty packed content. And then I ran a 2.5-hour VIP session afterwards for another 2.5 hours of very solid content. But people are spending $100 for one day. At this other weekend event, people were spending $100 for an entire weekend, 3 days, a 3-day seminar. And they got really upset about the pitch. And it's not like there were just 1 or 2 people. That the whole tone of the room, that there was basically 3 camps. One camp was really excited about the pitch, wanted to see if they could do it. And if they could do it, they did do it. If they were excited enough, they wanted to see if they could do it. And then there was the camp that was rather ambivalent about it. They go, well, it's a seminar, it's an inexpensive seminar. You don't come to these things without expecting a pitch. And then there was the camp that didn't want the pitch. Or they wanted the pitch to just have the beginning, middle, and then it's done, and let's get back to content. That I didn't spend my no money to come here to listen to a pitch. I want content. I'll put up with your pitch so that we can get back to the content. Now, depending upon how much experience somebody has is going to determine what kind of reaction they have. But because I was privileged with being in discussions with over a dozen people, in half a dozen different discussions, I got a whole bunch of different feedback at various styles and various levels of judgment, and I've also had an opportunity after the event to have conversation with members of the speaker's team. And so I've had some interaction with both his direct customer service person and with the one who runs his social media. And we've had some back and forth conversations, and we've been able to lay some stuff out, and I was able to pass along some information for them to use at their staff meeting. So it's kind of a non-incidental sort of interaction here. So with these three put together, I was able to kind of discern that we have a judgment problem going on here. And I decided that what I was going to do this week is I was going to take some time and I was going to talk on exactly this issue. And we're going to open with the scripture side of it. I've done an entire series on the scripture side of it, so I'm going to kind of do that pretty fast in just one half of the message, and share some of the concepts and ideas that I shared ultimately that the other person accepted and understood and issued back their apology. And some of the material related to what I shared with the speaker and what I would like to see going on more with our politics. Matthew 7:1a. Judge not. Now, this is a basic admonition, is to refrain from passing judgment. Just don't do it. Just judge not, period. Stop there. He who is without sin cast the first stone, from John 8. But focusing on Matthew 7:1, just judge not. Now, this judge not admonition is not absolute. It doesn't mean you can never, ever decide anything is anything, and you always have to always be up in the air on every single moral decision, every single discernment, every single item in your entire life. Of course not. Here at Quest Zion, we teach that if it pertains to your responsibilities, you have a responsibility to judge. And what that means is, say, if you are responsible for a business, if you are responsible for your employees, if you are responsible for your children, if some people are under your protection, if this is part of what is yours that you are supposed to do, you have to make judgments. You have to decide if someone is suitable as your employee or not. You have to decide if someone is a suitable member of your team or not. In my case, I have to pass judgment on whether or not I think people would make good students. And if I think someone will be a danger to my students and their classmates, and people that I'm teaching, training, and working with, that I can't have that student in my class. And we haven't run into this problem very often, but we did run into this with one guy. He decided on his own, well, people need to be tough. And so he decides he's going to try to hurt them to toughen them up. Now note, he's a guest. It's not like he's one of the black belts making a black belt level discernment. He just basically walks in from the street. He wants to sign up and beat up everybody in the room. Now note, we found out fairly shortly he didn't want to get beat up. He just wanted to do the beating up. And I had to work with him personally, and when he saw how hopelessly outclassed he was, because I have been doing this for 45 years, that he realized this whole beat-up philosophy was probably going to get him hurt if he's working with someone with the level of skill disparity of a 45-year training master and someone who has maybe half a dozen years of high school and early college wrestling experience. And wasn't quite as interested in that part anymore. But he came back. He wanted to sign up. I said no. I had to pass judgment on my impression of his worthiness as a student, because I am responsible for the safety of my students. And so I had the responsibility to make that call. And I made that call. Now, does that mean I determined he's a bad guy? No. It means that I determined that he is not suitable for the role for which he is applying. We also teach that if it pertains to you and your interests, you have permission to judge. You have a right to pass judgment on things that affect you. You can decide if you want something as part of your life. You can decide if you want to have to live with something, put up with something, have it in your workplace, have it in your martial arts school, have it in your church, and you can make that call. But in either case, whether you have a responsibility or you have a right, you limit your judgment to as far as it ought to go based on the totality of the facts. So I'm not judging this guy whether he's a good person or a bad person. My responsibility is to judge him as a prospective student. So how far does my judgment go? My judgment begins and ends with whether or not he's suitable to be my student. I have no idea if he would make a good boyfriend for someone, a good husband for someone, a good employee for someone, a good friend for someone. I don't know. That's not my responsibility. That doesn't affect me. All sorts of different people like all sorts of different things. And I don't know how he behaves outside the particular context I saw him. I'm not even totally sure he couldn't learn to train safely. But what I do know is he already showed me he has an emotional willingness to give himself permission to hurt other people. And I'm not willing, as the instructor being responsible for my students, to make the call that I'm just going to decide to unleash him on my students and find out what happens. That I have the responsibility to protect my students. And because my students know that, and they know that, I'm not letting this person sign up. He came back, he wanted to, I'm not letting him sign up. That my students I have know I am here to protect you. I'm here to help keep you safe. And I'm not going to bring someone in who has the declared intent to cause harm and has already obviously given themselves intellectual and emotional permission to do that. Because I can't always be the one working with someone. The master can't always be the one working with this one particular new guy to make sure that other people are safe. That would be irresponsible too, because then I'd be denying my other students their master instructor. But the judgment is limited in scope. It only means what it means. It doesn't mean what it doesn't mean. I don't take it beyond the totality of the facts. I don't take it beyond what I know. I don't take it to contexts that I don't know anything about, and that frankly are none of my business. Matthew 7:1, judge not, and it continues, judge not that you be not judged. And the idea here is that there's a mechanism that those who judge will be judged. That if you judge other people, you invite judgment. Now, if you look in the political realm and social media, you'll see a lot of this judging back and forth. If you have some strong liberal friends and some strong conservative friends and see how often do they have interaction and how often do they present their side in a logical, well-reasoned way. You have one, the other, or both just drawing conclusions and making arguments. That amongst themselves, there's an echo chamber, and when dealing with the other side, there's just fighting. That happens a lot. And you get the judgments back and forth, the accusations back and forth, the determinations of who's stupid, who's evil, who's wrong, who's heartless, who's a Nazi. Which I thought was hilarious, because there was this whole mini thing on the rise of Nazism and how Hitler came to power. And both sides, because I have lots of friends across the entire political spectrum, both sides were using it to show the other side rising to power exactly like Hitler. And because I see it from both sides, and I'm going, okay, so this side thinks that side's Hitler, that side thinks this side's Hitler. And that they're leaping to those conclusions. Now, is the other side likely to have a reasoned discussion upon why their side is or is not Hitler? Or are they just going to fight over it? They're just going to fight over it. Matthew 7:2a explains this whole thing of, okay, so if you're going to judge, you're going to be judged. If you're going to throw it out there, it's going to come back at you. Here's the principle one verse later. The first half of Matthew 7:2 says, for by the judgment by which you judge others, so shall you be judged. So when you're passing judgment, that judgment standard is going to come back on you. Now in politics, we see people trying to avoid it all the time. So by the judgment by which you judge others, so shall you be judged. So this is where it gets interesting. The standard we use to judge others, we are declaring as a proper standard. So if I can say something and I'm declaring this is how you judge people, this is what I think is proper to do, I'm declaring this as the standard of judgment, and in so doing, I invite God to hold me to those standards. I invite others to judge me by those standards. Now, some people will try to impose morality on other people. I decide what you should do. I take my standards that I actually do fulfill and say, well, you ought to do this. Like, I've never had a drug problem or a drinking problem. So if I'm judging other people for drinking, I'm judging other people for drugs. Well, I don't have that problem. And so I'm not being a hypocrite. I really don't do those things. But what if it's principle-based? There's a possibility this is principle-based. What if I judge someone by their weakness? Do I invite other people to judge me on my weakness? Do I invite God to judge me on my weakness? I have no idea what it's like being an alcoholic. I have no idea what it's like being an addict. I have no idea what it's like having that kind of weakness. What if when I jump on someone for their weakness, I'm telling God, like, Lord, if I have a weakness, if I have an area where I keep messing up, judge me on this like you see me judging them, because this is the proper standard of judgment. And if I refuse to forgive, you refuse to forgive me, because that's the penalty that they should suffer. What if I'm judging by egocentric or ethnocentric standards? Now, egocentric means the things that are idiosyncratically me. Ethnocentric is the things that pertain to my particular subculture or culture. And so, I'm a Southern Californian American. And if I decide Southern Californian American style, well, that's the right way. And all these other people, they're just wrong. They're evil. They're ignorant. They just don't know. What if I have 21st century Western sensibilities? And so I decide that the whole world is wrong, evil, and idiotic because they do not also have 21st century Western sensibilities. What if I'm going to judge all of human history because I'm right, and humanity should have consulted me first? What if I decide I'm going to judge God in the Bible because God should have consulted me first? I could have given God a few pointers. I could have told God what he should have put in his Bible. And sometimes we have no idea how much we do things like this. So ethnocentric is my culture right, other cultures wrong. Now, it's totally okay to say my culture is right or my culture is good from my perspective, because I understand it. I'm part of it. But that doesn't necessarily follow that other cultures are necessarily wrong. So if I say 2 plus 2 is 4, 3 plus 7 is 10, am I right? Of course I'm right. And so someone else says, well, dog is D-O-G and cat is C-A-T. So, well, that's different than, my stuff. So you're wrong. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to do math. That's lousy math. And you go, yeah, because we're spelling. We're writing words. What are you doing? Numbers? What kind of word is numbers? And then we end up in this big fight of, well, what's right? 2 plus 2 is 4 or C-A-T is cat? I'm right, you're wrong. You're wrong, I'm right. And we would recognize in that kind of context how silly that is. And when we get egocentric, things that are idiosyncratically me, boy, would I be in trouble. There's a whole bunch of stuff that is idiosyncratically Scott. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't have a problem with. And then there's some weird idiosyncratic things that I do have a problem with, that I don't like, that are very, very common. But what if I took the I don't like this specific thing for this specific reason, because of this why and these ramifications, and I decide, well, I'm going to skip all the narrow this and that and whys and whats and principles and rules. I'm just going to say, those people are bad. Those people are stupid. They don't know what they're doing because they're not just like me. And sometimes it gets even worse than that, where it's okay for me to mess up, but it's not okay for someone else to mess up. That if I'm doing stuff, they just need to put up with it, But if they're doing stuff, they need to be what I want them to be. They need to do as I tell them to do. And I was dealing with an employee one time, not my employee, an employee at a business. And his perspective was that the upper management should listen to me because I'm the one that's here. Okay, well, if that's his principle, that the people on the front line should have some more say. All right, that makes sense, if that's the logic. But then, because he was in the middle, he also has people below him. And to the people below him, says, well, these people need to do what I say because I'm management. And so whoa, hang on a second. So if you're the boss and they're the subordinates, they should do what you say because you're the boss. But if someone else is the boss and you're the subordinate, the bosses should do what you say because you're closer to the problem. So he would flip stated principles. His real principle was everybody should just do as I say. The bosses should do what I say, the subordinates should do what I say, my coworkers should do what I say, the customer should do what I say. I should be in control. Well, that didn't really work out so well for him. Over the course of time, he lost that job. Because he decided for himself that he was the ultimate arbiter of what was and was not okay. And if you agreed with him, you were smart. If you disagreed with him, you were an idiot. And that you just needed to listen to him and just do what he said. So if we judge by egocentric standards, and that was egocentric, that his view was it just needs to be the way I think it needs to be, and I'll make up principle-sounding things to justify how I want it. That what if we get judged by everyone else's egocentric positions? Boy, we're going to be in so much trouble. Because you can bet I violate the egocentric positions of 7 billion people on this planet. Something I do breaks anybody's rules. There probably isn't a human being on the planet where the way I do my entire life, every single thing, 24/7, 365 days a year, the extra day on leap years, and I never break anybody's rules. I can bet you. I probably wouldn't get through an entire year without breaking the rules of every single human being on this planet somewhere along the way. And of course, God himself. And the ethnocentric standards, the cultural standards of us getting to decide how everyone else should be. From even the ethnocentric standards of a political perspective, the ethnocentric standards of an educational level, the ethnocentric standards of a particular subcultural group, where there's enough of us to create an echo chamber, there's enough of us to live in a bubble of people who only agree with us and think like us and see things like us and react emotionally like us. And what if we get judged by everyone else's bubble? Everyone else's echo chamber? Well, I don't want that. That you can be pretty much assured that I'm going to be running afoul of most, probably all of them, at some point in time. So the more we consider this kind of thing, the more careful we might be about passing judgment. Matthew 7:2. The second half says, the measure you use shall be measured to you. So what punishment do we feel is appropriate? What penalty do we wish to oppose? Might be as simple a thing as our ill will, mean nasty things we're going to say. Might be some other stuff we actually want to do. Might be yelling and screaming and some other punitive behavior. How we treat others when we pass judgment is a declaration of what we think is the right response. Now, if you've ever overreacted, and you know you've overreacted, and you apologize for overreacting, and you work on stopping it, then that at least shows you're not giving yourself permission to do it. But if you justify it, if you rationalize it, if you make excuses for it, you are declaring permission to do it. And when you do that, that is a declaration that you think the judgment you are passing and the penalty you are imposing is appropriate. So what we wish we could do, or what we wish would happen, is a declaration of what we think ought to happen under similar circumstances. What if this works on principles too? What if this also works on egocentric, ethnocentric? What if this also works on weaknesses? What if this also works on attacking sore spots, gouging our way into wounds, twisting daggers in the backs? What if I know particularly vicious things I could say that I know is going to push someone's buttons? And I feel totally justified because of what they did. Might I be declaring that I believe it's totally appropriate, that my buttons ought to be pushed? My weaknesses might be different. The openings to my heart might be different. I actually right now only have 3 people in my entire life who have such open access to my heart that they could do that to me. And for the most part, none of them would. But history has shown, even just in the last few years, at least one of them has, and would not back off. And what if she says, well, that's totally appropriate? Well, then she's declaring that it would be totally appropriate in the other direction too, whatever her weaknesses are, whatever her sore spots are, whatever her particular vulnerabilities are. Whoever it is who has access to her heart has permission to do it to her. Now, do we actually want to give that permission? Of course not. No one likes having that stuff done to them. But when we give ourselves permission to do it to others, that's what we're declaring. When we say that we think the penalty for this is, I hope to get run over by a truck. So when I offend someone in a similar way that runs afoul of their sensibilities, they get to declare that I'm the one who deserves to be run over by a truck. And so on and so forth. And so we watch out for these kind of things, because we don't want to be the one declaring to God, declaring to the universe, declaring to the people, declaring to those closest to us that this is how we pass judgment. Because if you see me doing that to those people, do you have a reasonable expectation that if you and I run afoul of each other, I'm probably doing it to you too? If I'm willing to say these things about those people out there, what if you happen to agree with them and you disagree with me? And you think that they're right, but you see how I judge them as being evil, as being stupid, as being all of these horrible things. I just told you I think you're all those horrible things. I just don't know that you're all those horrible things because I don't know that you agree with them. And some of this has to do then with Matthew 7, 3 through 5, the whole parable of specks and logs, or motes and beams, depending on your translation. This parable is about judging others, about telling them what to do, about telling other people how they ought to live their lives, telling other people how they ought to see things, how they ought to do things, when you have significant problems of your own. The basic lesson is to get your own life in order, to get your own heart in order, get your own thinking cleaned up first. Fix your life first. Now, in particular, it doesn't say that you're not allowed to. What the parable tells us is, if you handle your stuff, then you can more clearly see, so that now you can help. Otherwise, what's going on is you're probably seeing things through the filter of your own issues. So if I've got stuff that's still messing with me, I need to be aware that I am probably interpreting everything going on around me through the lens of my own pain, through the lens of my own anger, through the lens of my own fear, through the lens of Miles' law of where I sit in life. And if I can understand that, then I know that whatever judgment I pass is as much or more about me than it is about the other person. It's as much or more about me than it is about that other group. It's about me. It's not necessarily the issue even. So getting back to the seminar, one of the things that we got to talk about, and one of the things that I shared as a personal thing for me to keep in mind, because there were things about the pitch I didn't like. But I had to keep in mind, okay, I'm looking at this from my position of abundance in life. He's pitching it from his position of his abundance in life. And recognizing that there's a big difference there. That when you have a millionaire making a pitch, and you have a so-not millionaire hearing the pitch, that the socioeconomic levels of society we're coming from are so mismatched that I want to try to listen to this and hear it. Okay, this is a guy who's done this. This is a guy who's done this with and for other people. He walked the path he wants to teach. So he's doing the sensei thing. I like the sensei thing. Because the difference between a sensei and a coach is a coach goes and learns about stuff, and then they take their knowledge and they turn around, and then they get other people to do what they've learned. And they're not expected to do it. There's not a been there, done that. So think about NFL coaches. How many NFL coaches do you expect can get on the field and play at the NFL level based upon being a coach? If there are any, and you know, a lot of football fans probably know of some, how many of them can do that because they're a great coach versus they can do that because they're a former player? Because they're a former player. So that's coaching. But a sensei is one who has walked a path and can show others the way. In martial arts, you work your way up to black belt, you get the sensei title, and then you show other people how to work their way up to black belt. And so you walk the path and you show other people how to walk the path. Well, this guy has walked the path. That he started where a lot of us are. He has this whole story where basically he was working for $8 an hour and he was doing his music. He has this really intense story where he had this whole music career thing going on, and it was, you know, had this ebb and flow, and it kind of went up. He almost got his big break, and he walked away from his big break because it was tied to illegal money, and he wasn't willing to go there. And he said, you know, I've got a big enough following, big enough audience, and he ended up having this ebb in his audience, and so he left for a while, and then he had this big comeback concert. And he got 20 of his super fans to help him distribute thousands of flyers, and he had this big event at this venue he had been at, and he steps out there and he has 2 people in his audience that can hold 500. I mean, I can't imagine if I booked a place where I can teach a seminar, and I've spent 6 months of my life promoting to get people to my seminar, and I step out on stage and there's 2 people in the audience. I can't imagine how heartbreaking that would be. And he rocked out for his audience, and on his way home he just broke down, and like for so many of us, he stopped, he couldn't drive anymore, and he calls his mom. And mom's a great philosopher, and he had to stop mom. So Mom, I don't want to pep talk right now. I just want to be upset. And so Mom just listened to her grown-up baby boy, and he was heartbroken. So he's been at the bottom. He's been there. He's done that. He's been where a lot of us have been, and he got up there. And so I'm listening to his pitch in that sensei framework. Okay, he's been here, he got there. What's he doing now? What is he pitching to people? And he's pitching them basically a sensei program. He's pitching them how to get from wherever you are to where I am. Now in my case, I'm already working with a fairly expensive coach who's working with me on things. And she's been perfectly blunt with me. She says, look, I know how to coach people to 6 figures. You give me 2 years of us working together, and I have consistently coached people up to 6-figure incomes. Somewhere between $100,000, $250,000, I can coach you there. But if you want to have a 7-figure income, I am not the coach for you. I can coach you this far because I've walked that path. I've helped other people walk that path. So very sensible, which tells you some of why I'm working with her. It says, but if you decide from there you want to step on, I'm not your person. And you'll need to be working with somebody else. And she says, now I have some recommendations of some people that would be great people to work with, or you can pick someone of your own that works things at a higher level, but this is what I can do. And so that's how I'm watching this guy. But there were so many people who had such an intense reaction against him that I am where I am, and I'm not where you are. I would like to be where you are, but boy, am I mad at you for wanting me to pay to get from here to there. Be like people showing up at martial arts school and saying, yeah, I've seen how good you are as a master. I want to be as good as you. But boy, am I going to be resentful if you ask me to pay tuition. Boy, am I going to be resentful if you ask me to actually pay for the classes. No, no, no. You're supposed to just want to help me. That I'm supposed to be able to come and for the price of the trial period and maybe have to buy some equipment, I expect you to train me forever for free because aren't you really committed to this? Don't you really want to help people? Or, well, you're a lawyer. Don't you care about people? People need lawyers. Why are you demanding to be paid? What's wrong with you? And I have a meeting later on this afternoon with someone who they have some money to pay. They don't have to pay me. They actually have to pay a judgment. And my expectation is that they're not going to be happy about that. That's the way the system works. And they're probably going to gripe and complain. I'm prepared for that. And quite legitimately so, personally, in my opinion. That's why I'm really expecting it. But the system is what the system is, and that was the judgment the court rendered. And so it's going to have to be paid. It's not nearly as bad as it could have been, but it's also not as good as they wish it was. And so they're going to have to make that kind of determination. But what if they keep getting on and say, but I need help. I want your help. I don't want to have to pay that much for it. Why do I have to pay? So John 7:24b tells us, judge with righteous judgment. Judge with righteousness. Specifically, we are told in John 7:2a, do not judge according to appearances. And so there's something about appearances that might lend itself to us passing quick judgment just based upon first glance. That we take a look at what something looks like to us and we decide that's what it is. And we decide we are right. But the Bible warns us, don't judge according to appearances. Judge with righteous judgment. The indication being that these are two different things. That how things first look and what things really are might be different. That our initial emotional response and what's the right thing to do might be different. Now, has any of us ever experienced that in life, where you had an emotional reaction to something, then in retrospect you realize that initial emotional response might not have been the wisest, most loving way to handle something? I feel pretty safe guessing that's every single person. Like, not even just everyone here and everyone looking and everyone listening, but everyone, period. So the important principle here is that how things look might not tell us enough of the story. Might not tell us enough of the story to know what's really going on. Might not tell us enough of the story to know why this is what's going on. The initial appearance of things, what it looks like to us, might also not be what other people see. That's that Miles' Law thing, that where I stand depends on where I sit. I will see things from my perspective. Now, I see women make this kind of shift probably more easily than men, because I see that when there's a status change or a relationship change, their view of things changes. But, all of us know what this is like. That when you are a frontline employee, you see things as a frontline employee. But when you're the manager, you see things as a manager. When you're single, you see things as a single person. But when you're married, you see things as a married person. And when you have a little baby, now you see things from a parent perspective. I mean, you might be wandering around your house and you don't think twice about things. But when you have a little baby crawling around on the ground, getting into everything and wanting to touch everything and put everything in his mouth, all of a sudden you see things you would never see. Why? Because you're a parent. You might be watching television and it doesn't occur to you, but all of a sudden your ears perk up, you hear the swear words, you see all the things you don't want your kid to see. And your perspective changes because your role changes. And so that initial appearance of things to us might not be what others see. I might be watching something and I don't think twice about it, but I have like a mom sitting next to me with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and she sees something completely different than I see. I might be the martial arts master, but someone who's never had any combat training sees it completely differently. I might see a situation that might need some intervention. They might see a situation that might need some running away from. I might see something that prompts me to step in to make a difference. They might see something to hide from, to run away from. And that's okay. But how it looks to me isn't going to match up with how it looks to other people. And if I'm aware of that, if I'm aware there's almost always more to the story. if I'm aware that other people have their own perspectives, other people have their own roles, other people have their own filters, other people have their own starting places, then it helps me withhold judgment. To understand that what I think I'm seeing might not be what other people are seeing. What I think is going on might not even be what's really going on. What I think is behind what's going on, and that initial response I have to something, might not be connected to enough of the story for me to really understand. Now, we can have running conclusions, but we hold loosely enough to them so that we're always open to new information. So here's some practical impacts. Stepping outside Scripture for a bit to some of the more secular-ish conversations I've had that deal with just practical stuff. You don't need to dive into Scripture to see that these things are true. Passing judgment stops discussion. Once judgment has been passed, rather than discussing something, any communication tends to come in the form of those conclusions, and the presumption that the conclusions already drawn are the correct conclusions, and that any discussion with someone who disagrees with those conclusions tends to come in the form of argument. That instead of having communication about, well, what's my point, what's your point, it tends to be why I'm right, why you're wrong. And it also tends to create echo chambers, which means when you find people who already agree with you, you just talk with the people who agree with you to help bolster your pre-existing conclusion and to draw battle lines as against the people who might disagree with you. Passing judgment in this context stops the listening. Once we've already decided what something is, based upon whatever we know, complete with all the fact gaps we might have, we stop looking for more information. We've already decided. So when I'm walking up to the door, at some point my brain makes a judgment, determines that's a door. Once I've decided that's a door, my brain stops trying to figure out what it is, right? Now, with something as concrete as, is it a door? The answer is either yes, it's a door, or no, it's a door. And then it goes, okay, well, what are all the variables of a door? Well, what if it's not really a door? What if it's just a decorative feature on the wall that looks like a door maybe to me, but it's not a door? If I've already decided it's a door, I'm not thinking about it anymore. I've decided. And so when you see that that's where the brain works, to make those kind of shortcuts. So it's not constantly wondering about everything in life. The brain works that way so that we're not constantly having to take data inputs to figure stuff out. When I see a door, I know it's a door. I know how doors behave. I respond to it as a door. But when we're dealing with people, when we're dealing with human action, when we're dealing with the complexities of psychology, the complexities of culture, the complexities of people's entire life experience with people as whole people living whole lives, as the collective chorus of an entire group, of a perspective from a particular point of view. That is much more complicated than, is it a door or not? And when we pass judgment, we stop listening because we think we already know. We quote unquote know. And so we don't need to cloud our thinking with any more facts. We don't need to withhold judgment because we know already. We've decided, and that's bad. And we have our emotional reaction to it. And darn it, we're committed to it. Passing judgment also stops others from bothering to speak. When you already know someone cannot be persuaded, one of two things tends to happen. Either people argue, sometimes making points, sometimes just making attacks. And the people who will tend to speak up when they know you can't be convinced, and they know you've already passed judgment, and they know it's only going to be a fight. Sometimes just like to do it because they like to fight. Sometimes I'll engage in those things only if there's an audience, and I'm doing it for the sake of the audience. I don't think this person's going to be convinced, but I know people are watching, and I know that other people can be convinced, and that what may influence them is how they see this go down. And those are the times I will engage in those kind of things. So if it's just going to be an ad hominem back and forth, I'll just leave it. I'm not going to bother. If I know I can persuade, not the person I'm talking to, but the other people who are watching the exchange, watching the discussion, watching even the debate, then I do it. But why? Because I think I can persuade these other people. I'm not really talking to this person because I don't think I'm going to convince them. I'm just arguing with them. I'm not speaking to them. I'm speaking at them. And if I've already drawn a firm conclusion, someone might be trying to talk to me, but I'm not taking it as them speaking to me. I'm taking it as them arguing with me. And so sometimes when people speak up, it just turns into a fight. And I'm not listening anyway. Or, and this happens a lot, people don't even bother. They don't even say anything. Like with most of these people, I don't bother to say anything. I don't want to deal with them. They're not going to be persuaded anyway. I could stand up and try to make my point, but it's not going to make a difference. It's going to get me riled up. Why do I want to put up with that? I even do that with students sometimes. The students demonstrate a resistance to being taught. I'm not going to push it. Like, I'm not teaching to fight with people. I'm teaching to teach people. I'm not here to put up with people having bad reactions to the things I'm trying to teach them. And if it persists on an ongoing basis, in time, they're not going to be my student. But even on a much more limited basis, what it does mean is they're going to learn much more slowly. I had a student at one point that his standard thing, he's what we call a counter-exemplar. When you taught him something, his first reflex was why it wouldn't work. And I would consistently show why it would work. And I was comfortable enough doing that I didn't need to remove him from class or anything. But over the course of time, he cut his own progress maybe in half. Because rather than learn it first, the first thing he wanted to do was challenge it. And for the people who just said, well, let me just learn it, let me take whatever that the master instructor is saying and let me just learn what they're saying, and let me understand what the lesson is, and I can tinker with it as I go, he would oppose it first. But the people who just learned it, they went at a good solid clip, and they became some of the best, most proficient black belts I had. When someone's a counter-exemplar, instead of getting the black belt in 4 to 6 years, it was taking much, much longer. Because every single step of the way said, well, what's wrong with this? And a lot of that came from my own personal perspective. What's wrong with me? And more as I how can I use this? Those students progress much better. And a lot of it is, sometimes I just didn't want to bother teaching him because it was annoying. And I would rather teach people who are going to learn, not teach people who are going to argue. I would rather teach people who respond with some gratitude, oh, thank you, rather than people who respond with a dismissal. And a lot of my students have no idea how much detail they've missed out on over the years because they're in the mindset of challenge and self-justification rather than the mindset of learning. And it's very common. I mean, it's not at all unusual. And the people they hurt is themselves because they miss the stuff as it comes through. And they also put me on notice. Only teach me what I want to learn when I want to learn it. Because if you teach me something I don't want to learn, I'm going to make you pay a price. It might be a momentary price of momentary disrespect in front of the other students, which then creates a problem. Because then I have to deal with that. Because otherwise I'm modeling for the other students that it's okay to show me that kind of disrespect. Or I just need to keep that from happening in front of the students. And that's usually my strategy because I don't want to end up wasting my time in this conflict and managing people's behavior when what I want to be doing is teaching this material. Additional practical impact. Passing judgment stops thinking. This is huge. Once I've decided what something is, I no longer need to think about it, like the door example. Once I've decided it's a door, I don't need to think about, is this a door or not? Once we pass judgment, we tend to stop thinking open-mindedly about a thing. Instead, we shift to validation motive to prove why our judgment is correct. We make rationalizations. We make excuses. We bolster our existing position, and we tend to ignore competing evidence. Passing judgment stops understanding. Once we've decided something is bad, I don't need to understand it any more deeply. I already know everything I need to know. It's bad. Once we pass judgment, it's often hard to really understand what might really be going on here, or why something might be happening. Now, it might objectively be a bad thing. But once I've decided, I pass judgment, I don't need to know anymore. I've already decided. I could end up missing some really key information. And if something really is bad, and I miss key information, I might miss the key that will help me fix the bad. If I don't understand why something might be happening, I could end up being a part of the why and end up making it happen even more without realizing it because I've stopped understanding because I already decided. And of course, therefore, related to that, passing judgment stops learning. If I'm not listening, if others aren't even bothering to speak, or if any communication comes speaking at me instead of speaking with me because we're in an argument, and I'm not understanding, then I'm also not learning anything. That means I could end up going through multiple experiences. Well, darn it, I'm so sure that I'm right and they're wrong. I'm not learning anything. I might not see a point or why this wrong thing keeps on happening again and again and again. Well, maybe there's something I can do about it. So what do you do? What to do? Have a running opinion rather than firm judgment. It's okay to have an opinion, but hold loosely to it. Hold as tightly to the opinion as the totality of your knowledge warrants. Recognizing we almost always have fact gaps. Sometimes big fact gaps, sometimes little fact gaps. Sometimes we're making leaps of assumptions into people's motives or people's intelligence or people's biases. Hold loosely to those things. Now, one way you can tell how well you're doing is how it shifts as you get more information. If running insights only bolster an existing opinion, you may have made a firm judgment and you're autopiloting a confirmation bias. So if you decide you don't like something, or you don't like a politician, or you don't like a side, or you don't like a group, or you don't like whatever, and every piece of information you get only confirms that, darn it, I'm right, then you're probably on autopilot on the confirmation bias. If from time to time, at least from time to time, you go, oh, well, that was really good. See, they're not all bad. They're not all bad all the time. We can agree on some stuff. And that you can see those things. Or you can see when maybe some people on your side are treating the other side unfairly. They go, okay, well, you know, in general I agree, but that's really not a fair characterization. Then you're probably doing okay. At least okay-ish. Seeing information in both directions indicates you're doing well. And so when it comes to political things in a deeply divided country where it's roughly 50-50 on opinions, if you can understand where the other side's coming from and that makes sense to you, you just disagree with it, you're probably doing okay. But if all you can see is they're stupid, they're evil, they have a mental disorder, whatever it is, you're probably stuck in confirmation bias and all of your filters are coming from that validation motive. So consider this. What specific things do you dislike and why? What specific things? Be as narrow as you can. If you can be as narrow as you can with what you dislike, as narrow as you can with what you disagree with, you've got a real shot at gaining insight here. The more specific you can be, the easier it is to use it for learning. The more specific you can be, the easier it is to use it for discussion. The more specific you can be, the easier it is for you to develop your own system, your own thoughts, your own opinions, your own perspective, your own method, your own principles, your own rules, your own system of handling that sort of thing. What would you do differently? How do you think it should be? How would you preserve the benefits that this particular way of doing things is attempting to create and is successfully creating while trying to handle the problems? So for this particular one, going back to the speaker's presentation and his whole pitch, I can look at that and narrow it down to specifically what exactly is it I don't like. Now I'm keeping in mind, he's the expert. He's the sensei. So if I'm sitting here as a yellow belt or orange belt and I'm evaluating the black belt, the Renshi, the junior rank master, that I need to really carefully consider how I'm making this evaluation. I can say, well, this instructor, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, what if he does? What specifically do I not like? Why specifically do I not like it? I was watching a demonstration of some martial arts techniques years ago. And I'm watching the technique and going, I don't like that technique. Specifically, what I didn't like about the technique was multiple punches to the head. The reason why I didn't like the multiple punches of the head is once you hit someone in the head one time, it's difficult to predict exactly how a head is going to move. And if you're punching with a closed fist on an unpredictable skull, the probability of breaking your hand on the head goes up with every single punch. So was that specific? Did I have a specific what? Well, I don't like that technique. Those masters, they don't know what they're talking about. That style doesn't know what they're doing. Darn it, those ancient masters should have consulted me. I could have told them how to build their martial art right. That'd be pretty arrogant, right? But I looked at, okay, what specifically do I not like about this technique? So I don't like the technique as a whole. Why? Because of the multiple punches of the head. Does that mean I don't like any punches of the head? No, I was fine with that first one. Because that first one, you know where your target is, you can hit your target, but you're going bam, 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 bam. And it's all closed fists and it's all on a skull. And I go, okay, so that's what I don't like, and why don't I like it? Well, it's not the way we do things in my style. That's not true. No, it's specifically what? Because I believe when you hit a head multiple times, you don't know how that head's going to move. And if you're going bare knuckles, so you don't have your wrists wrapped, you don't have gloves on, bare knuckles against the skull has a high probability of getting your hand broken the less control you have over the point of impact. And if you're going really, really fast, and the head is moving unpredictably. So I drew that conclusion. Turned out one of the nation's top combat physicians was sitting right next to me at the table at this presentation. And so I leaned over to him and I asked him, so as a combat doctor, what do you think of that technique? He says, well, I think it's a really good technique if you don't mind breaking your hand. And I asked him, so is it the multiple shots to the head? So yeah, by the time you get to about the third punch of the head, you don't know what's going to happen. You will probably break your hand. So, both me and the combat physician agreed on the same thing for the same reason. So here was the next step for me. Go back and look at my techniques in my style and determine, do I have any techniques that break that rule? And I found that I did. That I had a technique that I found in my style where there was this variation on the last move with the closed fist, that if this, you punch this way, if that, then it turns around this way, if this, it turns around. And I realized, as fast as fighting goes, as fast as that technique goes, you have to have a really fast eye and really fast adaptability skills to make that call on the fly. And that we could fix it by ending with a palm strike instead of a punch. So we fixed it. It began with, I don't like that technique. What if that's where it ended? What if it began with, I don't like that technique, and went to, oh, that art's junk? What if it went from, that art's junk, those masters don't know what they're doing? I would have missed all of that. And wouldn't have had anything I could use. Because I went, okay, I don't like that technique. What is it about that technique I don't like? I don't like exactly this. For exactly this reason. And then flip it to my own role. Do I break that thing I'm judging for? Do I break the rule I have just determined is the rule? And if I am, I need to fix it. So what specific thing do you dislike? Why specifically do you dislike it? And the more specific you can be on the exact what and the exact why, the easier it is for learning. And you can figure out, what would you do Do you do your own version of that? And how would you do it differently? Is there anything you need to fix? And how would you preserve the benefits? Well, in a punching case, we change it from the closed fist to a palm strike. We can still maintain the benefits from the palm hitting, because we're still hitting, and we protect our hand so that we don't break our hand on a moving hit. And when you can do stuff like that, then disagreeing with something becomes a powerful method of learning. But you have to have permission to disagree and narrow your disagreement. And then here's a huge thing, and this for some people is one of the hardest things in the world to do. What would make this make sense? What would make this make sense? So let's assume that what I'm teaching makes sense. Well, in general, what I was teaching was good stuff. But if you have a traumatic brain injury, the stuff that's going to flow more blood to your head is not healthy for someone with a traumatic brain injury. So don't do that part. What would make it make sense? Well, if you're talking to someone who doesn't have a traumatic brain injury. Oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess that would make sense. Well, most people don't have traumatic brain injury, so you're okay for most people. And it's going to be the same thing on a lot of stuff. What would make it make sense? So politically, you may have a side you disagree with. What would make their side make sense? Why does it make sense to all those people on the other side? Is it because they're all bad people? Is it because they're all stupid people? Is it because they're all duped? Or from their own perspective, does it make sense? So when the speaker was making his pitch, what would make his pitch make sense? Now, one thing, of course, is almost always true of any pitch, like, well, he'll make money. Well, that part's going to be true. But let's assume he's not doing it just for greed. Is there anything else that might make it make sense? Well, for one thing, he lives in a different world than a lot of us. And he was really pushing it. What if, say there's him and 9 of his buddies, so there's 10 of them. And they realized for 8 of the 10 of them that what finally got them over the hump, what got them to really start doing the things they needed to do to be successful, was that some speaker somewhere in their fairly recent history really had to close them hard and really had to pressure them. And that because they were susceptible to that pressure when in their coaching, they really didn't want to do the stuff. They had all this approach avoidance, all these excuses that then their coach could close them hard on do what you need to do. And because they were susceptible to that, they did it. And if that was the experience of 8 out of 10 of the people, might they feel a philosophical mandate to really push people? Because that's what it took to get them to do it, and that's what it took to get 8 out of their 10 friends to do it. And maybe a couple of the friends that they didn't respond to the high pressure pitch, they kind of worked it out a lot on their own, they shopped around, they picked their coach. Maybe some of them spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of years, half the time on bad people, half the time on good people. But that 4 out of 5 of them found that I had to be closed hard, but they had to get me out of my head and into my purpose to step across and say, darn it, I'm doing it. I'm going to do it. And the only reason I did it is I had to take out an equity line of credit on my house to pay for it. I was committed. I had no choice. It scared the hell out of me. But I was going to lose my house if I didn't make this work, and so I did all of the work I was supposed to do. Then might he feel a philosophical mandate to really push hard and to get people to take that big step where you have to do it. You can't hide. You can't let your fear control. You have to do it because now your family is counting on you. He might feel a philosophical mandate to really push. And when you start to think past what you think, that wherever you go first, think past that. And say, what would make this make sense? If you don't like, if what you don't like actually did make sense, in what reasonable way might it make sense? Now, it might not always be something so big. I had this argument with my mother. And as I'm going through, I'm realizing my mother is making some really stupid arguments. My mother is not a stupid woman. She's a really wise woman. Meanwhile, my mother's saying that my son is making some really stupid arguments. My son is not stupid. My son is really smart. I sent him to law school. He has a PhD. He is not this stupid. Why is he making such stupid arguments? Well, in this process, I was the first one to figure this one out in this particular exchange. Well, I thought, like, okay, if my mom's not making sense, what would make this make sense? What different in my understanding would make what she's saying make sense? And what I figured out is there was one word we kept using again and again and again. What if she's using that word differently than me? That's a possibility. That's kind of the linchpin word of this entire discussion. And so I asked her, okay, what do you mean when you use this word? Well, you know what that means. So, okay, well, let me tell you what that means. And I gave her my two-part definition of exactly that one term. So, well, no, that's not what I mean. It's, and because she had a definition to work on, she could, okay, it's not that, it's more like, and it's, okay, now for me, what you just said is this different word. So this whole time, I've been using this word meaning this. So have you been meaning that this whole time? Because I would use this different word. And so, well, yeah. So, oh, okay, well, everything you said for 45 minutes makes perfect sense. And she says, yeah, everything you said for the last 45 minutes makes perfect sense. And then we had the whole thing. It was really seeming really weird, like stupid weird. But because of that view of what would make this make sense, that we were able to bridge from, boy, this is getting stupid, to, now I understand. And once we understood, we agreed. And we just realized we spent 45 minutes having this back and forth on something we agreed on, that we were having two different conversations the whole time. What would make this make sense? If you can do this, it shows that you're probably developing a better understanding. Now, if you figure out what would make it make sense, does that necessarily mean that's the case? I mean, do I know anything about the speaker's background and the circles he runs in? No, that's a different world than the one that I live in. He has a different peer structure than I have. He has different relationships than I have. He lives at a different socioeconomic status than I do. He lives at a different viewpoint of money, a different viewpoint of abundance, a different viewpoint of possibility than where I live. And so he sees a different path than I see. He has a different point of view than I see. He's on top of a different mountain than I'm on top of. But if I want to climb that mountain, I probably want to understand what he sees. And I need to think about, well, how would I do his differently? What would make sense for him is what he's doing. Well, what would make sense for me? And part of it, and what price am I willing to pay to do it my way? As he's doing it his way for whatever his reasons are. Would I be willing to make half the money that he makes to do it my way? Well, that's all about me. Would I be willing to help half the people he helps to do it my way? Would I be willing to have the people who need me most not take the step to do it my way? And a lot of those things is also being open to the fact that this is my perspective from right here, right now. And to understand that if I start climbing up that mountain, I go, I see why that was that way now. And would I still be willing to change? Might I frame it differently? Might I decide that, okay, now I see what he was doing. If I can remember what it's like being at the bottom of that particular mountain, maybe I can remember to take some time to talk to the people who aren't already climbing this mountain about what this mountain is, and be able to frame that I'm showing you how you get up this mountain, and I'm giving you the opportunity to be your sensei, someone who's climbed this mountain, to show you how to get up this mountain. And you may be a master of your mountain, and I have no idea how to climb your mountains and get to the top of what you've gotten to the top of. But this is my mountain that I know how to climb. And I can help you, and this is how I can help you, and here are your options. And if I can remember to frame that for people, that might be good. On the other hand, I may find that that undermines what I'm trying to accomplish? I don't know. I'm not there. And by understanding that I'm not there, it lets me be more open and pay more attention, pay a different kind of attention, and try to develop a better understanding and to hold loosely enough to my existing understanding to be open to the possibilities that I don't know it all. Why? Because I don't know it all. And by doing that, it helps foster your own growth. The sooner you pass judgment, the less information you need to have to pass judgment, the less opportunity you have to learn, the less opportunity you have to grow. The more loosely you hold judgment and the more you seek insight, the more you seek understanding, the more the things you disagree with and the things you dislike can be some of the most powerful influences in your life. Something some of my friends have said is that they have a political view that in their college education was very unpopular. And what they found is later on in their life, they are really, really good at making their points. Because they knew every time they spoke up, they were going to be disagreed with. So they better be able to back up everything that they say. Meanwhile, some of their colleagues on the other side of the aisle, at the schools that they went to, everybody agreed with them. They were in the echo chamber. And what they found later on in life is they don't know how to argue their point. They're very conclusionary. Well, of course we're right and you're wrong. Because. And the becauses really aren't very good. It's these random ad hominem attacks. It's these randomly stated principles that really aren't principles. They're justifications. Because they live so much in that particular bubble, they lived so much in that echo chamber, they never had to justify their points, back up their points. Say, here's a position, here's why, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That they lost that ability. And so if you take a look at the things you don't like, if you take a look at the things you disagree with and you just dismiss them, you miss that chance. You miss where you need to learn and grow. You miss where you need to learn how to present your side more effectively. You miss a lot of insight. You miss a lot of what helps us be better, more insightful, more understanding people. And I believe that is important for all of us.